Thank you very much, Chair. And first, just to say, I hope you can hear me okay. And I'm here in Leinster House. And to thank our speakers very much for those great presentations, very useful to hear, I know, for us on the committee. I do want to echo the words of other speakers, though, and indeed just following up on Adam Harris's point there, that it is disappointing about the, I suppose, the lack of a clear time frame for ratification of the optional protocol. And I think we've all shared our concerns about that. And I appreciate, Secretary General, you know, it's difficult to give an exact timeline, but I wonder if you could say a little more about just the establishment of the Decision Support Service, that key element in the ratification process. And I just wanted to ask one other question, really about again, a specific issue in the work that's being done by the department, and being conscious that there has been this change and this move into the children's department from both health and I know from justice and so on. And I think all of us very much welcome that, and we note the need for an intersectional approach to dealing with disability rights. But where this has become really into focus, certainly for me, and I know many of us, has been the area of education. And huge issues in my own local area about access to local school places, local ASD classes for children with autism in particular. That's a huge issue in South Dublin. And I know in other areas too, where provision is made, it's often made at quite a distance from where children and their families live. It means children have to, in some cases, be bused or driven out of their area. It means that they're therefore missing out on a lot of social engagement locally. And it really does seem, you know, it seems inequitable, because they may have siblings who are going to local schools and they can't participate in those local schools. And I note that, you know, you're delivering the access and inclusion model on seeking to ensure meaningful participation of children with disabilities and additional needs in early years education. So that's very welcome to see a focus now on early years education. But I just want to ask how we can be sure that at early years stage we're not going to see the same difficulty with lack of local access to places. And is there provision for requiring local providers to ensure that children with disabilities are included? We've run into huge problems with schools, and just the process doesn't seem to be sufficiently robust to ensure that schools will in fact deliver local places. So it's really that key issue, a very specific and practical issue, and then the more general point about a timeline for ratification and the Decision Support Service. And thank you very much, and thanks also to Commissioner Gibney for your words. I think very powerful words, if I may say, in terms of disability rights and treating disability matters as rights. Thank you.
Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you very much, Ivana Bacik. Do you want to come back on Ivana's points?
If I may, Chair, I would, and thank you, Deputy Bacik, for your comments. I take the point about a lack of a very specific time frame for the protocol. And as I say, it's not really possible for me to be very much more specific now, but my focus, as I say, and the department's focus will be on getting the Decision Support Service in place and moving ahead as quickly as we possibly can thereafter. I can't be too specific because I know there are individual steps that aren't completely within our control, but in terms of getting the Decision Support Service in place first, I think that is valuable and a requirement. And then the Attorney General needs to advise on our readiness to ratify the protocol at that point. But we will certainly do everything we possibly can to move it as quickly as we possibly can in that context. Just in terms of the Decision Support Service and the timing of it and so on, just to give you a bit further information in relation to that, the legislation is being worked on at the moment, and as I mentioned in my opening statement, our hope is the Minister will be in a position to bring proposals to government in this regard the week after next, which would be the 29th of June. That general scheme has priority drafting, so the aim is to publish the legislation then in the autumn term, and our overall aim is to ensure that legislation is enacted by the end of this year, if at all possible, and I think that is a realistic deadline. If we can have that legislation in place by the end of the year, in the meantime, the Decision Support Service, who I know the committee met a number of weeks ago, they in the meantime have been working themselves on putting all of their processes and structures in place. And I think then having the deadline of June of next year is a realistic one for them to be operational. The specifics of that include an interdepartmental steering group that's chaired by this department to ensure that the Act can be commenced by next June. And the steering group is also supporting the DSS itself to become operational by that date. That steering group is important because it includes representatives of the Mental Health Commission, the Decision Support Service itself, the Department of Health, the HSE, the Department of Justice and the Court Service. So there is a concerted effort by all involved to ensure that we're ready, firstly with the legislation and secondly with the practicalities and the logistics of ensuring that that happens within that time frame. In terms of aim and how we ensure local access, we've never had a policy of absolutely requiring this access, but what we have done is strongly encouraged it, and we have also, in terms of the financial structures that we have offered, both in terms of aim itself and for the link individuals, the people who are trained as supports, childcare support personnel to work with children with additional needs. We have funded that programme and the training of that programme very substantially. So that essentially is the way in which we've done it. I'm not very close to the access to local education and autism classes in the education sector. We could certainly take that back to the Department of Education. Certainly very conscious of that as an issue. And I might also add that Minister Rabbitte has recently committed to an autism innovation strategy, and the group which will develop that will meet very shortly. It's being set up within the next month. So I hope that covers the questions that Deputy Patrick asked.
Okay, and Adam Harris, I think you want to come back in? You're muted.
Apologies. Just in relation to Senator Batchick's question in relation to some of the barriers on the ground in accessing services, particularly around accessing to education services, I think we can bring this back to the implementation of the UN CRPD. The UN Convention hasn't been transposed into national law. Therefore, the implementation is required. It requires national law to work and to live out the values of the Convention. The reality is, while we've heard about new legislation today, what we shouldn't lose sight of is a lot of the existing disability legislation in Ireland, dating from the late 1990s and the early 2000s, has never been fully commenced. So, for example, if we take the area of education, we're looking at the Education of Persons with Special Education Needs Act 2004. The non-commencement of that act is very problematic from a UNCRPG point of view for a few reasons. It means that the bulk of supports provided in an education context are on a non-statutory basis. So whereas the UNCRPG speaks about rights, really the supports being provided by the state are of a much more grace and favour nature. And in addition, the non-commencement for such a period of time means that our statute book in many respects around disabilities is significantly out of date. Very specifically within the context of the UNCRPD, if we look at the EPSN Act, its definition of disability does not align with the definition of disability in the UNCRPD, in that it seeks to provide an exhaustive list of disability as opposed to taking a person-centred approach. And it also does not recognise, I suppose, the individual lived experience of disability. But critically, it actually provides an exemption around inclusion. So it actually goes so far as to say you can be inclusive up to a point, but there's some people we just can't possibly include. So there's a real need to look at our domestic statute book, commencing and updating it if we really are to fulfil the values of the UNCRPD.
Much. Fiona O'Loughlin.